So, we're live. Welcome along. So, welcome, Earthlings. Yeah, this is a bit of a impromptu thing in a way because the last animal rights show we had Laura Schaefer with us, and I was going to ask her a question, which is the question that that is before us today, so to speak. But I never got around to it, and so I thought I'd ask it myself and answer it myself as well. And I just thought it'd be quite interesting to find out what people thought. So welcome along to this thing, and we're asking really about, it's my perception at least, that the movement is getting more and more welfarist as it moves. So that's what I want to kind of explore, really. So we are all just animals. Hello, the spiritual vegan. Hello, and tree vegan. That is a very old question from a long time ago, so I'm not quite sure if they'll be in the house as we're supposed to say. But welcome everybody. Anyway, Laura, hi. Yes, that's the way to do it. Well, that's interesting because that might come on to that a little bit. Animal products of cruelty. We'll see. What I want to do then really is start with something from Steve Best, and everybody who knows me knows that I'm always referencing this particular talk from Steve Best. I've just got this little clip from it, and it's 90 seconds long. It's only 1.5 minutes, so it's not too bad, as it were. So I'm going to play this, and then this is the basis of what we want to discuss, at least initially. This is, I wouldn't say controversial, but probably one of the most contentious parts of Best's address. This is 2003 in Luxembourg, and if you want to see all of it, which I do recommend, then you can go to YouTube, and if you just put in Steve Best, Total Liberation Luxembourg, and it's 2013, any of those details should bring it up.
That occurred to me some time ago. Whether you realize it or not, and I don't care what your politics are, this movement is a left-wing movement. This movement is a left-wing movement, and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. Look at the values we embrace: equality, democracy, inclusivity, non-discrimination, non-hierarchy, rights, justice, peace, non-violence. These are left-wing values. Where the hell do you think these came from? From the radical movements, from the progressive movements, from the liberal movements of the 18th and 19th and 20th centuries. These are left-wing values. Right-wing values are hierarchy, military, family, nation, borders, war, security. That's not what we talk about. We talk about the opposite. Our heritage, whether we realize it or not, is from the left. You could be a conservative, just try to recognize this. And we're trying to build on the limitations of the left. We're trying to, build this moral trajectory beyond where the left says it stops here. And we say, no, it begins there, and we're going to take it to where we need to take it, to a planetary ethic. So this is a left-wing movement, and there is therefore a natural opening between us and the left.
Okay, so there's actually quite a lot in that, even though it is only 90 seconds long. So I'm going to go through it again and stop, just so we can have a little talk about it. But the first thing to say, I think, is that for someone to say this is a left-wing movement has only recently become as controversial as it is. And I think it is now. And I think that is the core reason why we've moved to being a welfare movement, in the sense that I think that our values used to be based on our left-leaning values, which we all shared. and that's broken down. And so now we've had to find another set of values of which we can then kind of cohere around. And I think those are things that we borrowed from on welfarism, like being opposed to cruelty and being an animal lover. These are the things that modern vegans say all the time. So, but before we get to that, I'll kind of end up repeating that. But I just want to kind of just go through the best thing again and stop now and again, because there's a heck of a lot in that little section.
That occurred to me some time ago. Whether you realize it or not, and I don't care what your politics are.
Right. That's the first thing. And he says this twice in a way. He said, I don't care what your politics are, because he's specifying what he claims to be left-wing values and what he claims to be right-wing values. But he's recognizing that people who are generally on the right can also have some policies in their mind which you would probably call left. So it's more complicated than just saying you're left wing, you're right wing. I think that's kind of what he's saying a little bit there. And just for context as well, in another part of the talk, Bess says that when he defines the left, he's talking about the left, which you call the hard left, which are kind of anarchists, communists, right through to left-leaning liberals. So it's a very broad version of the left for Best. A bit of a delay.
This movement is a left-wing movement. This movement is a left-wing movement, and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. Look at the values we embrace. Equality, democracy, inclusivity, non-discrimination, non-hierarchy, rights, justice, peace, non-violence.
Right, so what Best does there is list what he's claiming to be left-wing values. And again, equality, democracy, inclusivity, non-discrimination, non-hierarchy, rights, justice, peace, non-violence. Now, if we agree that these are left-wing values, then I think it's not contentious to say that these are vegan values, in the sense that we're covering just about everything that we stand for as a movement. But again, I'll come back to that in a minute.
These are left-wing values. Where the hell do you think these came from? From the radical movements, from the progressive movements, from the liberal movements of the 18th and 19th and 20th centuries. These are left-wing values. Right-wing values are hierarchy, military, family, nation, borders, war, security.
Okay, so under the list, so this is a bit of a shorter list, but this is what Best is claiming to be right-wing values. And again, hierarchy, military, family. I've used this list before, and people say, what's wrong with family? Really, it's kind of maybe talk about the nuclear family, the patriarchal family, that kind of thing. You know, the man in charge type family is probably the construction that's been evoked there. So family, borders, you think of building walls perhaps, war and security.
That's not what we talk about. We talk about the opposite. Our heritage, whether we realize it or not, is from the left.
Okay, so that's his best case. And as he said it before, whether we know it or not. Now, if we just switch to this little thing for a minute, this is from Epedia, I believe. I'm not quite familiar with that, but again, it's a kind of the main difference between the left and the right. And essentially, what Best is saying is what it says here, in a sense. There's a little bit more down here. What is left wing and what is right wing? And again, by and large, it's kind of suggesting that what Best is putting forward as these two lists of values are, by and large, roughly speaking, generally speaking, are right. So I suppose one of our first jobs is to decide whether we think that that's true. And again, with a caveat that people might be quite nuanced about holding what might, in theory, seem to be contradictory values. Let's go back to Best.
You could be a conservative, just try to recognize this. And we're trying to build on the limitations of the left.
Okay, so that's the second time. He said you could be a conservative, but I want you to think about it. So he's saying, I'm not interested in your party politics. I'm interested in for you to think about the values of the movement. And so that's what he talked about. And then he says this thing about the limitations of the left, because that's another plank of an argument that's going on now in the movement, which is that, and of course, a lot of people are using this phrase, the intersectionals, that the intersectionals are, as it were, putting humans first and this kind of thing. And also another plank of the argument is that vegans can't criticize those on the left, but those on the left can criticize vegans, and that the vegan community won't criticize those on the left, but they will criticize other vegans. Now, one of the planks of Best's talk is that that's not the case, that we need to challenge their speciesism. He says that one problem with the left, as in with everybody, of course, is that they're deeply speciesist, and that needs to be challenged. And so he says we need to find ways of working with these people, but we have to challenge them.
Trying to, build this moral trajectory beyond where the left says it stops here, and we say no, it begins there, and we're going to take it to where we need to take it, to a planetary ethic. So this is a left-wing movement, and there is therefore a natural opening between us and the left.
Okay, so this natural opening between us and the left, what he's talking about is one of the main things of his version of total liberation, which is alliance politics. So this is the core of the question that I was going to ask Laura, in a sense, which is that if we are thinking about creating alliance politics, then what you tend to do almost like naturally is think, well, the easiest way to forge alliances is with people in other progressive movements, which by and large share our values, and those values that we listed before: equality, democracy, all this kind of thing. And so it's always been thought that if we were going to forge an alliance, it would be with those types of people. Now, that's the thing that is now being critiqued, I think. It used to be common, and I've said this before, it used to be common in the 1980s for you to do, an animal rights march or something, or a demonstration, some type of activity at the weekend, might even include something semi-legal like a raid, a NAL type thing, Northern Animal Liberation League type thing. But then, by the Tuesday, you would probably be on a Reclaim the Night march. And then on the Thursday, you'll be a Rock Against Racism gig. All of that fitted together with no question in those days. So if you're looking for alliances, you're looking for those people. And that's what Best was saying, that we need to work because we're not big enough to do what we want to do on our own. So we need to forge alliances. And in some senses, this plays into what Patrice Jones says. She's got a really good video called Commonalities of Oppression. And she says that the mainstream is not the majority, that the actual majority of the people on the planet are the marginalized people, those who are oppressed. And again, if we could bring them together, then you would have a solid base for change. And so this is the entire idea of alliance politics as I understood it. And worth repeating that the natural idea of who we would be in alliance with would be the other people on the left, accepting that we are a left-leaning movement. So I think because of the way Best draws out what he says is the left, I think we can use phrases like left-leaning rather than left-wing, which is probably less threatening in a way. So I think it's defensible that we can say that we are a left-leaning movement. And as I said right at the start, to say that was never that controversial, whereas now it is. And so the next part of this is social movement theory. And those of you who've seen my kind of videos and the kind of stuff that I've done with the Animal Rights Show will know that I'm always talking about social movement theory and the idea that when movements become successful and they start to grow, which social movement theory would say reach the kind of takeoff phase, then what happens is there becomes a big increase in people coming in, and a lot of those people will not have the same values of the people who started the movement. And this goes across the board of all movements and indeed sometimes political parties. And so what you might then get is some kind of power struggle between what the meaning of the movement is. Another part of that is that obviously movements move, and so they do evolve. And so that kind of discourse within a movement is important. It needs to happen. My position on that is that if you want to make changes within a movement that you've joined, you need to make an argument for it, but you need to make an argument for it with reference to what is and what was. Now, that's not happening in the vegan movement. In the last 10 years, seems to me that a lot of people who are not left-leaning have come into the animal movement. And they have tried to reshape it by critiquing, or at least rejecting, its original values, to the extent that they're totally resistant to even learn about them. I always tell the story that when a lot of people started coming into the movement, I reached out to quite a few of them, thinking that they would be really enthused by the news that the radical movement that they thought they had joined is actually more radical than that. And I thought they would go, oh, that's wonderful. But they didn't. They were resistant to that message. And so they seemed to want to reframe vegan animal rights in their own image. And that's why this idea of alliance politics with those on the left is now under serious critique within the movement, because you've got people on the right now. That doesn't make any sense to them, because then they're not in that political situation. In fact, a lot of them would try to make the claim that animal rights and vegan animal rights is an apolitical movement. And of course, claiming that something is apolitical is a political stance in itself. So this is the thing that's been kind of bouncing around in my head for a little while. And I've been very concerned, as many of you will know, about the increasing use of welfare language in the movement, to the extent that it started to confuse me. Why are we so happy to use this kind of weaker language? And it struck me that maybe it's because that's the thing that you can unify on, and that is kind of apolitical, because everybody is against cruelty to other animals. Even have mercy, my favorite word in the movement, of course. And another phrase that has come back into the lexicon of the movement, which was a surprise to me, is the notion of being an animal lover. And that was rejected in the 1980s. We would never say that. And one of the main reasons why we would never say it is because it was associated with animal welfare. It was kind of, that's the Rspca, that's the Humane Society, that's the ISPCA in Ireland. And so because we weren't welfarists, we didn't go for their language either. And so another plank to this was, I was quite taken aback really by when Earthling Ed did a expose of the Rspca. A lot of his followers had obviously made the assumption that the Rspca was a vegan abolitionist organization. And of course, it never has been, although it was quite radical back in the 30s, actually, but that was just a wing of it. But in terms of its general kind of stance, it's a traditional animal welfare group. And what confused the modern vegans, it seems, was that they had the phrase prevention of cruelty to animals in the name. And so they thought, well, that's what we vegans do. And again, this kind of weird kind of thing where we are seeking something to unite us, and it seems to me that we've opted for the language of animal welfarism in order to unite the movement. And so that means, in my view at least, that there's been a de-radicalization of the movement. We speak the language of something that we don't fully stand for, because when I learnt about what the prevention of cruelty to animals means was, well, cats and dogs, first of all, with the Rspca, for example, but also that it fitted in with what I learned as a sociologist, which is that animal welfare is a major plank of cultural speciesism. And cultural speciesism basically says, don't be cruel. But that doesn't mean you can't use them. And so this is a new part of the vegan claim now, that modern day vegans have made this direct road, this direct link between don't be cruel and veganism. And I think culturally that's really problematic, because when most people who are cultural speciesists, informed by animal welfare ideology, hear the phrase don't be cruel, what that translates to them is, let's seek out the non-cruel, the promise of animal welfare. So they then ask you about things like free range. And then, of course, we've got the fact that the definition of free range has changed, but you still have this seeking of the non-cruel. Okay, well, I don't want to cause cruelty to them, so tell me what I can eat. You know, which ones of them can I eat? That this is what cultural speciesists ask for, right? And generally speaking, the Rspca would say, well, free range, or even, you know, well, that's fine, but don't kick your dog, type of thing. We've tried to move that paradigm a little bit, and I suppose one answer to me from the modern day vegans is, well, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to radicalize the notion of prevention of cruelty to animals, whereas the way that we dealt with it in the past was to stand outside of that and talk about animal liberation and animal rights, and not get involved with animal welfare, because once you're involved with the animal welfare paradigm, you're, by using the language that they understand, the public, as it were, the connections that they understand, we're trying to do something about. We're kind of trying to break them, but it kind of doesn't seem to work too well. I think we get bogged down. You're against cruelty, go vegan. And I don't think that kind of computes in the individual imagination, but also culturally, it kind of doesn't follow. So I'm just wondering whether this is the conundrum that has been bouncing around in my head for a while. It is that because we no longer come together as a left-leaning movement which is seeking alliances with other left-leaning movements, we've now looked for other things to unify us, and we've landed on animal welfarism, or the language of animal welfarism. And it just seems to me that that is possibly what's going on. So I'm going to change my glasses because I can't see very well with these ones. I'm going to see if there's anything in the comments. So first question, did any of that make sense, everybody? Let me just scroll back up and see what we've got here. Yes, that okay. I'm sure you're talking about Steve Best and not me. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. What else have we got? Right, Kevin. There's been more interest in appealing to the right has been inclusive, that the entity with the left is too great. It seems partly to come from non-profit strategists. Yeah, so I tend to think that it comes from wherever you look in the modern day movement, to be honest, Kevin, because it comes from elements in what they would call the grassroots, but then we might think of it as a very kind of corporatized version of the grassroots. But it also comes from, I mean, I think you've got people like pro-veg and that kind of thing, and maybe veganuary in mind for that. Tone. Had a welfare argument used against me today. Someone defending Impossible Foods animal testing. Yeah, well, there is a lot of that going on. I thought that what would have happened would be that that the Beyond Burger would have kind of emerged as the kind of vegan meat of choice, as it were, over Impossible Foods because of the animal testing. As I understand it, and I don't know the full details about all this, so correct me if I'm wrong. As I understand it, Beyond Burger has not included animal testing, and the Impossible Foods did, at least initially, and then they also said that they would reserve the right to do it again, and maybe there would be certain regulatory authorities that would, as it were, make them do it, possibly, every now and again or something like that. Especially if you've got a new improved recipe type thing, then you probably would have to do something again. Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one because this goes back to the thing that people like Cranky Vegan complain about, I suppose, which is that because veganism has become the moral baseline of the movement, it means that things like anti-vivisection has really been sidelined. And so, I've seen quite a lot of vegans, and obviously we've got the kind of spectre of the pandemic hanging over this conversation, obviously, defending vivisection a lot more than what you would have expected, even just a few years ago, I think. So I think that might, in a weird and wonderful way, play into this issue as well. Yeah. Welfare. Yeah. Well, spiritual vegan Jennifer. Main platform that she uses is TikTok, and it's really difficult to find anything on TikTok which is not welfare language. The dominant word is cruelty within the kind of TikTok community. Animal cruelty. If you're against animal cruelty, go vegan. That's the main message. So there is that. There is also something that's going on in relation to the definition of veganism. Don't know if I can just bring up something very quickly. But I did a blog entry called Foul Mouth Vegans. Let me just hide that for a second and get rid of Steve Best. That gets rid of me. Okay. Yeah, I've been having this problem with the setup of this. I don't know why. Let me just share this screen and should be able to bring it back. Yeah, a tab, Foul Mouth Vegans. I don't know if it's because of this new fancy thing that's going on. Right. Okay. So this is a blog entry that I did recently. I'm obviously not going to go through all of it, but there's this little bit here, which is the British Society current definition of veganism, and what I've noticed, and Benny Malone and myself in a VegFest stream recently, we went through the definition of veganism, and what I've noticed is that the activist community, the modern day activist community, have slimmed down the meaning of this. They've generally cut out the reference to philosophy. And then when it says all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals for food, clothing, and other purposes, it's usually that's where they stop at purposes. So all the rest of it is not usually included. And I think one reason for that is because it talks about the benefits to humans, which the kind of animals only contingency of the movement never like to talk about it. And some people say, well, they're just talking about diet. Well, they're not, because they're talking about the benefit to animals, humans, and the environment. And then they say in dietary terms. So it's broader than that in initial sense. So I wouldn't be too sad if they stuck with that and they talked about what it says in the definition, all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to. But it seems that the exploitation of, the strong claim, has been jettisoned as well. So you're kind of left with the idea that veganism is a way of living that seeks to exclude, as far as possible and practicable, all forms of cruelty to animals for food, clothing, and other purposes. So it's really been kind of slimmed down. And I think, again, this is to kind of fit in with this kind of idea that's going on, which is that animal welfare language is so central now that that's just the way that people think. I think it's slightly worse than that, actually, Tone, in the sense that when you point out the definition, I've actually had them post as in a kind of like, as it were, a meme comment. Well, this is the definition of veganism. And they're often kind of all over the place with it, in the sense that they say, well, this is the definition of veganism, which was made by Donald Watson in 1944. And so virtually everything they know about the definition is not true, because Watson didn't define veganism back then, and certainly not in the way that it's defined now by the Vegan Society. And that definition came into being between 1979 and 1988. So even when you point it out, they still like to go back to their own version of it, because it kind of, well, I guess it fits their politics, I suppose. The irony of that. And a carnist hunter proudly say, not to me, but I was within earshot, that his vegan friend was happy to eat animals that he trapped and killed because it was done in the right way. Well, that, although I think they're joking mostly, but that kind of claim is made very often on TikTok lives. Oh, you know, I'm a vegan, but I go hunting, this kind of stuff. So I don't know. I mean, maybe it's another generational difference. I would claim is that even though you've got the possible and practicable part of the current definition, I'm a bit reluctant to call it the official definition, because somebody objected to that recently. But it's the current Vegan Society definition. But that is really been central to what people say about veganism now, and I don't remember it being that important to say possible and practicable. And maybe that's because you've got a lot of people now talking about food deserts, indigenous persons, people with allergies and all that kind of stuff, because there's almost like a script going on at the moment where you've got people who are opposed to veganism having a big list of objections to it, and many of it is on the practical, I just can't do it even if I wanted to type argument. Assuming that he wasn't lying, it's really troubling idea that vegans are so welfarist that it's something that could even happen. It actively justifies and enables speciesism. Yeah, there was when I was involved with an organization called Animal Rights Zone. One of the people there went a little bit right of center and started arguing that things like roadkill was vegan, and also a bizarre argument which was based on that if you're, as it were, walking on a Sunday through a forest and a deer happened to have a heart attack and die in front of you, it wouldn't be a rights violation to cut what they described as a slice of venison from the deer. So I suppose these ways of getting around it have always been around in a way. But yeah, I used to say when people used to say, "Oh, we need to meet people where they are," I used to say, "Well, but they're in McDonald's." I suppose that argument doesn't work anymore for me. But there you go. Yeah, this is an interesting question. I don't know. You see, again, I'm not so hooked up with these vegan meats. I'm still quite happy with the veggies mainly, but also stuff like the Lennon McCartney things. Although again, there's a problem there with them. I think recently being taken over by something. But then you've got it's very difficult. This idea of ethical consumption now, I think, is more and more difficult because they've all seem to have portfolios of shares, which means they have kind of shares in each other and everything. And so these kind of parent companies are probably well dodgy regardless. Okay, I engage with welfarists in the same ways I engage with vegetarians, reducitarians, flexitarians, etc. I see them as pre-vegan with the potential to become abolitionist activists. Yeah, I wouldn't object to that. I've not had much success myself talking to people who favor kind of like a welfarist approach. And I think in terms of we'll just get into kind of labeling. People like Gary Francione would probably say that what we're talking about are new welfarists, and new welfarists are a little bit different from, say, the Rspca, in the sense that they argue that through welfare measures you can get to animal rights. Now, I've not seen that claim starkly put like that for a long time. I just think that it must be the psychology behind what they're doing. I think, especially now that they've got this thing where they think they can convince people, and I'm sure it's true with some individuals, that a "don't be cruel" position implies veganism. But I just wonder whether that's the thing that kind of creates the bit of rowing back. So even if people goes vegan on the basis that they don't want to be cruel to other animals, then maybe they're always open to a possibility that something else not cruel, roadkill or hunting, would come up in their life and they go, "Oh, okay, well, I can do it this way then." It seems to me that a more previous and what I regard as a kind of stronger case for animal liberation and particularly animal rights. I mean, I would say rights-based animal rights. If you've got that under your belt and that's your philosophy, I don't think you're looking. There's a possibility that it's going to creep up on you or anything. Or I kind of tend to think it does with the cruelty people. I think if that is the basis of what they're doing, then something else not cruel, if they're persuaded of that, and especially now when, we're all focused on things like crop deaths and stuff as well. And maybe a lot of the welfare vegans could be turned away on that kind of grounds, because they don't have the stronger ideas. Well, in my view, anyway. Again, if I'm making sense, John. Yes. Well, this is one of my bugbears, but again, there's kind of some movement. I mean, I've had words with George Martin about this, and people think that carnism now has moved on from being a vegetarian concept. So it, and even by Melanie Joy herself. So this is where it gets a bit nuanced, in the sense that when carnism was originally conceived, it was certainly a vegetarian concept. In fact, in the famous book, Why We and all that, veganism isn't even in the index, but vegetarianism is quite a lot. Veganism actually does appear in the text, but it didn't make it into the index. And the very early talks that Melanie Joy gave, she talked almost exclusively about meat. She started off with that thing about the Labrador and all that kind of stuff. And then, because the rise of Melanie Joy coincided with the rise of the centrality of veganism, I think she had to kind of increase the amount of, as it were, vegan claims making within the concept. So I think that's probably what's caused a bit of confusion, because people think, well, Melanie Joy is a vegan, and now it's kind of a vegan concept. It was vegetarian. Well, see, a lot of people in my experience don't know that Melanie Joy was the person who coined it. They're just using it. I think one of the reasons why they use it is because it's less academic than saying speciesist. And I think it's got a bit of an insult about it. You're a carnist. And I think that's why people like it. I think they think, oh, having a bit of a dig by saying, oh, you're a carnist, you are. Whereas I think you're a speciesist, you are. I don't think has the same kind of thing, but also maybe it's to do with them kind of having to explain those words. And then the second problem with still using carnism is that if you talk to somebody about carnism who are new to the movement or are thinking about it and all that, and they go Googling it, they will end up with Melanie Joy. And when they end up with Melanie Joy, they end up with Tobias Leonhardt. And then you end up with a reducitarian position in which they're saying things like, someone who eats fishes and cookies with eggs in them are vegans, as far as I'm concerned, that veganism needs to be flexible and it should allow for exceptions. And Leonhardt's entire position is making the vegan movement bigger by making it other than vegan. So in other words, really retranslating veganism to vegetarianism, and therefore there'll be more vegans. That's his kind of logic, because his position is that a lot of people who are reducing are better than a few vegans who are ethically consistent. That's his position. Let me see, where were we? I've lost my place. Here we go. Let me go back. Yes. Well, Leslie Cross is we owe Leslie Cross quite a debt, I think, in the vegan movement. And another thing, this is really interesting. I think that we owe the Vegetarian Society quite a debt as well, and that's because when Elsie, Sally Shrigley, and Dorothy Morgan, who became Dorothy Watson, and Donald Watson were doing the argument, and Leslie Cross was involved throughout the 1940s, and even before that, they were pushing for a non-dairy section of the Vegetarian Society. And the Vegetarian Society, in the end, said no. And they kind of said, look, if you want to do your thing, go off and do it kind of thing, but leave us to do the vegetarian thing. And I think that did veganism a great favor, because that's what the vegans did. They broke out on their own, and then about 6 or 7 years in, possibly a bit less than that, 5 or 6 years in, Leslie Cross said, hang on a minute, we don't have a definition of veganism. We do have a definition of the vegan diet, but we don't have a definition of veganism. And so from about 1949 through to about 1955, Leslie Cross, in a series of essays, kind of brought about the evolution of vegan philosophy, which is the kind of thing that I talk about all the time. And this is the thing that if you read what he's saying that veganism has a focus and a scope. The scope is very wide-ranging, and it's to do with the moral evolution of humanity, and it's to help humanity. In fact, one of his most famous essays, or his most powerful ones, is called The Surge of Freedom. And the very first sentence is, I'm going to tell you what veganism is and what it can do for humanity. So that was the first thing. Usually you would talk about what could be done for other animals, and then, if you like, the knock-on effects. Whereas on this occasion, he said what is going to be done for humanity. So they weren't frightened of that entanglement thing in those days, and they they didn't feel the need, if you like, to talk about the focus first or anything like that. Whereas I would think, especially in modern politics, that's probably the best thing to do, is that recognize that there's this focus and scope to veganism, and talk about the focus, which is our relationships with other animals, and then talk about the broader expansive philosophy of veganism, which I always sum up as justice for all. So it's ideas like peace and non-violence, justice. Those are the planks of vegan philosophy. And they did feel, and Leslie Cross in particular, that Watson too, it kind of came round to it, I think, really, if we're honest about it. I think they felt that in a vegan world, a lot of the problems of humanity would be solved. They first of all thought it would morally evolve us, because we'd kind of de-evolved, because we'd had 2 world wars. There was that. And so I think they thought in a vegan world, things would be a lot better than it is now for humans, and obviously for other animals as well. So yeah, Leslie Cross's definitions, and if you read his essays, you can see him kind of grow and expand. And it's really quite fascinating. Hey, Benny, took me a while to shake off welfare language. Oh, okay. I think it was because I was a vegetarian first. Oh, that's interesting. You've never told me that before, but yeah, that is interesting. Again, on language, I had this conversation with Jeremy Hess in one of the early animal rights shows. It might have even been called the Animal Rights Show with Jeremy and Roger in those days. But I always say that words are not banned, and so the word cruelty has been used all the time. So it's not a banned word in my view. It's just that it shouldn't be the only word, and I don't think it should be the dominant word, and it's not the first word, even in the definition. So I think that's important, that we've got, first of all, a philosophy, but all forms of exploitation of and cruelty too. Now, if people were to, as it were, use that definition and use those 2 words in tandem, I'd be much happier than I am when they just talk about cruelty all the time, because I think that is the weaker thing to say, myself. Yes. I've noticed that recently there's been a lot less of that, but there was a time, probably was about 1-2 years ago, when people were bringing up the dictionary definitions all the time. And of course, the dictionary definitions are absolutely shite. I mean, they're useless. It always talks about diet, and they're just useless. So there you go. Oh yeah, was that about the roadkill and the and the deer? I think it must have been. Benny, Wikipedia is decent actually, though, because it says about Commodifying Animals, and that's something I'm seeing people use more. I think that's a strong claim. Yeah. Well, again, if people on TikTok were saying we're opposed to commodifying other animals and the property status of other animals and the cruelty too, that would be a hell of a lot better than just saying we're against cruelty, So there you go. Not quite sure what to do, Michael, with that. Not even sure what nooch is actually. Is that legal? I don't know what nooch is. There you go. Speciesism is an ideology in which it's considered appropriate to value some animals over others, with humans on top of that hierarchy. Well, I would argue with that. I think. Well, I know I would. I don't think that's the thrust of where we're going. All right, there's more. While carnism is an ideology which is considered appropriate to eat some the non-human species and the lower rungs of the species hierarchy. Okay. Well, again, it's about. I mean, that's about diet, isn't it? And it's about food. Okay, I use the term carnism because it means something specific and different from other terms. Yeah, the problem with it, I think, is it's only when Melanie Joy was a regular guest on AR Zone, and I think I was there for the first time we interviewed her, and then I'd left by the time she then did about 4 or 5 other things. But I said, why have you come up with this new word carnism when you could have just said speciesism? And she said that carnism was a subset of speciesism. And she said, in the same way as anti-Semitism is a subset of anti-racism. And so she was saying right from the start that she wasn't talking about everything already. And so speciesism was, if you like, the full kit and caboodle, and carnism was focused on flesh eating. And so that's why I never particularly liked it in the first place. Benny likes Leslie Cross. Good. All right, good. Nutrition. Okay, right on. Yeah, I didn't know that. And that must be, is that what you call it in North America? Nooch. Yeah, so. Right. I think that's it at the bottom of it. So, yeah, this was just to kick some ideas around, and because I was a bit frustrated not being able to ask Laura this question, but also I was trying to bring these strands together and just kind of see if it kind of fitted. So thanks for your for everybody who's kind of joined in with that in your comments, which I'll read again afresh, because this is an interesting topic as far as I can see. I am going to do a session with Ronnie Lee soon, because he's come up with this interesting idea about radicalism versus militancy, and the idea that every now and again, I mean, he can describe it better than me, but every now and again we might increase the amount of militancy, and that's what we did in the 1980s. But whether we thought on a more deeper radical level is probably doubtful. I think that's what he's getting at. Okay, just before yes, and thank you as well. Oh, let me do this. Yeah, smash a like, as we're supposed to say on YouTube. Smash a like on the channel, folks, and all that kind of stuff. Subscribe. Do you know, I get so sick of people saying that kind of thing. I tend to either forget to do it or just don't like doing it anyway. So let me turn that off now that I've put it on. Okay, people, thanks a lot, and I'll see you again. The Animal Rights Show will be back in about 3 weeks' time, and also maybe we're still working on it, but this Wednesday coming should be Laura Schleifer again, She did a talk at an anarchist book fair, I think it was, and unfortunately they had technical problems, and so I'm going to get her to present it again, so it's online for posterity and all that kind of stuff. So people, thanks a lot, and see you around. Goodbye, Earthlings.